Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined-up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Yep, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 79 with debut novelist Paul Howarth talking about his book, Only Killers and Thieves, set in the Australian outback towards the end of the 19th century. Paul's got loads to say about his writing journey, the power of critique and his writing process. There'll also be time for another trip to Book Bloggers Corner with show regular Victoria Goldman reviewing Turn a Blind Eye by Vicky Newham. First, a catch up from me, and as I record this, I'm sitting in a Premier Inn hotel room in Manchester after a long day filming food and cookery. For those of you who don't know, my day job is a producer at MGL Media, and things are pretty nuts for us at the minute, which is great, but it does mean it's difficult to find time for my own projects like this podcast and, of course, my novel. But if I've learned anything from the dozens of successful authors I've interviewed for Joined Up, it's that you can't let a little thing like a day job or family or illness or anything else for that matter get in the way of what you want to achieve. And whether that's recording a podcast or writing a book, we've got to get on with it and stop making excuses, which is why I'm sitting here recording this instead of watching Netflix, and why I'll be cracking on with my book synopsis when I'm finished doing it. Yes, my synopsis. So even the word is enough to strike fear into many an experienced author, and it's certainly been frustrating the hell out of me. Just to remind you, my book is called Safe Hands, a crime novel about Mickey Blake, an ageing and selfish safecracker who can open any vault with nothing more than a heightened sense of touch. And for the sake of a dying wife and a son who hates his guts, he's forced out of his Costa Rican retirement to rob a rundown casino in Skegness on the East Coast. I've been trying to prepare a synopsis in the first 3 chapters to enter a competition in the next few weeks. Now, I'm fairly happy with the chapters, but the synopsis is proving much more tricky. It needs to be 600 words or less, and my first attempt was 1600 words. Part of my day job involves editing video, taking huge chunks of what can be complicated material and creating succinct, kind of meaningful programs. So why can't I do the same for my book? I guess it's just because I'm so close to it, and my next draft I'm just going to completely go from a blank page and be as brutal as I can. That's the idea anyway. Also, I'm going to try to not refer at all back to the manuscript, at least initially, because I figure that if I can't remember something from the plot, it probably isn't important enough to be included in the synopsis. Anyway, my rant over. What about you? Have you had similar issues with writing your synopsis? Do you have any help or advice you want to share? Get in touch by tweeting me at JUPodcast or drop me a line at wayne@waynekellyWrites.com, as I'd love to hear from you. Okay, let's crack on with today's interview with Paul Howarth. Paul was born and grew up in the UK before moving to Melbourne in his late 20s. He lived in Australia for more than 6 years, gained dual citizenship in 2012, and now lives in the UK with his family. In 2015, he received a master's degree from the University of East Anglia's Creative Writing Programme, which we mentioned in our chat, and his debut novel, Only Killers and Thieves, is already available in the US and is released in the UK by Pushkin Press on June the 7th. Thanks for joining us on Joined Up Writing, Paul. Really appreciate it. How's things going? Congratulations on such a successful debut.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Great to talk to you today. And yeah, it's going well, I guess. It's a bit of a strange time. We're kind of around publication. You know, you're waiting to see what happens, but it's very exciting.
That's good. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, Only Killers and Thieves. Does a little bit about that, and I think it's already out in the States. Is that right, as we record this?
It is, yeah. So it came out in February in the States, and it comes out here on 7th of June. So the book is, as you say, it's called Only Killers and Thieves. It's set in Australia, in Queensland, in 1885, for the majority of the novel anyway. And it's set on the very edge of the Queensland frontier, so the very edge of the settled territories, with, to the west, nothing but outback, basically. So it concerns a family called the McBride family, who are running a small cattle farm, as I say, on the edge of the Queensland frontier, and particularly the two young brothers, Tommy and Billy, who, and this isn't giving anything away because it's on the back of the book, who go away swimming one day and come back to find that their parents have been brutally murdered. And they then have to take up with their wealthy landowner neighbour and a posse of what is called the Queensland Native Police to essentially try and take revenge for that crime. But the boys are young, they're 14 and 16 years old, and they basically find themselves thrust into adulthood and into a world that they don't really understand, and being used and manipulated for others' ends. And so the book's really about the relationship between these two brothers, about the frontier at the time, and about the history of colonial Australia as it played out then.
Well, it's great. I'm only halfway through it. I'm lucky enough to be reading an advance copy, and it's excellent. I'm really, really enjoying it. It wouldn't normally be my kind of go-to genre, but it's excellent. It's say, technically speaking, it's historical fiction, I guess, or a western, but it's a page turner. It's really, really. It's really entertaining book, so congrats.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. It's interesting you say that, is it historical fiction, is it a western, or just a good old-fashioned page turner?
Does it matter?
Yeah, exactly. When I was writing it, I didn't ever really think of what genre I was trying to land this in. It was just important to try and tell this story as compellingly and as engagingly as I could. And then, as you say, these kind of the labels get applied to it, and you realise, I've written a historical western novel without ever really kind of thinking about it. So yeah, it's strange.
That's the best way to do it, though. I think we've had this conversation on here before, but I think if you set out to write a specific, you start getting bogged down in, is it this genre, is it that genre? I think you're best to just, this is the story I want to tell, and here it is, sort of thing.
I think so. Yeah.
So on that subject, kind of what inspired you to write it in the first place?
So yeah, I mean, it's quite a long kind of gestation for the novel, I suppose. The short answer is I lived in Australia for some time, moved out there in my late 20s. I'm now almost 40, cough, cough. But when I moved out there, I kind of did so without any real understanding of Britain's settlement of Australia, of Australian history, and of the kind of legacy of colonialism that still exists today. So I was really reading Australian history while I was living there for my own education, I suppose, and at the same time travelling around the country, particularly rural areas, the outback, this kind of stunningly beautiful landscape that really hadn't been used, or felt underused to me anyway, in fiction and film, and at the same time reading about this period in British and Australian history that was almost exactly like the American West. Stories that I was reading were so familiar, and yet unfamiliar to me as a Brit and as an immigrant moving over there, that the two just kind of melded together, I suppose. And I knew I wanted to write a story about frontier Australia in some way, shape or form, and eventually came across this little known aspect of the history called the Queensland Native Police, and that was kind of the spark that set this book off.
And just kind of went from there. Well, as you say, it is. You're right. It reminds me of that kind of, because it's the frontier, it's the frontiersman and going out in this brave new world and kind of thing. And the Australian, the setting of the outback, as you mentioned there, it's a huge part of the novel, it's almost a case that it's almost a character in itself. It's it's epic, it's cinematic. So in terms, obviously, I know you lived out there, and I guess you can visit the outback. I don't know. I haven't even been to Australia, so but having read some of your descriptions in the book, I'm not sure I'd want to necessarily. But yeah, as you say, it's beautiful, but it's also this huge. I mean, it's desolate in places, and it's obviously it can be quite a dangerous kind of place. So, in terms of research and things, did you do a lot of research before you started writing the novel? Was it during or afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, there was a fairly long gestation for this book, I suppose, in that, when I was originally kind of traveling while I was out there, going, not necessarily just specifically the outback, but just rural Australia. Basically, whenever you get outside of a city, Australians call it the bush. So, you can be pretty much anywhere, and you sort of get that feeling of remoteness and isolation. But, those kind of places, they do leave a big impression, and so it wasn't too difficult to recall them, I suppose. And obviously you've got the internet, which is amazing, so you can kind of go and just jog your memory, see the kind of landscapes that you're describing. The landscape as a character is an interesting one, because I think there is something about these kind of frontier stories that if you marry them with the right landscape and the right description about landscape, it can really amplify the story. It can amplify what the characters are going through, whether it's a beautiful sunset or a raging dust storm. It can play its part in the book just as importantly as a character can, or a plot twist, or whatever you want it to be. So the landscape was very important. As I say, some first-hand research over a number of years, and photos, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, it is really evocative. It's obvious that you've at least spent some time there, as you say, and that really comes across. And why was it in terms of the particular time setting? Was it just a case of, as you say, this was kind of new information? I mean, I'm the same. When I was reading it, it's an education as well as it being entertaining. It's not something that I knew about at all. So was it just a case of that was the particular time that you were interested in?
Yeah. I mean, it was trying to find, and I remember kind of jumping around between different years and trying to find it was always going to be somewhere in the late 19th century, somewhere in the second half of the 19th century, because that was when Queensland became its own independent colony. Originally, the entire east side of Australia was just New South Wales, and then Queensland became its own colony in, I think it was 1859, I think. So it was somewhere from then until the end of the 19th century, which is when the native police kind of disbanded. But I needed to find the right year almost for the kind of story I wanted to tell, the kind of location I wanted to set it in. So it had to be feasible that people lived in that location, that they lived in the way I kind of wanted them to, needed them to for the story. The weather conditions needed to be right, so there had to have been a drought in that kind of period. So it was about kind of marrying all the factual and the fictional elements together, and 1885 turned out to be my year.
That's the one. That's the one you went back in the time machine.
That's the one. Yeah.
So speaking of going back in time a bit, let's take a bit of a step back and just tell us a little bit about how you came to writing in the first place. Is it something that you've done since you were a child, or you came to later in life?
Kind of a bit of both. I can remember as a kid, definitely, writing stories, stapling pages together to create little chapbooks, things like that. And at school, definitely English and certainly fiction and literature was definitely my favourite subject. And then I went off in a completely different direction. I became a solicitor. Worked in law for a number of years, and kind of fell away from fiction, I suppose. It was almost like I didn't have the time or the brain space or the energy to. Especially
if you're doing law, there's a lot of reading anyway, isn't there?
Yeah. Both reading and writing really kind of slipped off the radar. And then towards around the age of 30, I'd started having a desire to do something more creative, and I wanted to. I had an idea for a novel. It wasn't this one, and I thought, why don't I just have a go? I hadn't really written anything for years, certainly not fiction. And it started from there, really. I guess the bug kind of got in me, and that novel took a while, various drafts. Eventually, it kind of came close, I suppose, to being accepted or being picked up by a publisher. I found myself with an agent, which seemed kind of miraculous at the time, but it didn't make it. But that had kind of given me, I think, enough encouragement that I could maybe do this, that wasn't the right book. So there were a couple of others followed, again, some kind of near misses. By that stage, I was sort of working my way towards Only Killers and Thieves, in that I'd done some research on the history. I was kind of becoming, I think, a bit more confident as a writer. I was a bit more aware of the kind of stories I wanted to tell. It's a very long answer to your question.
No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. And then the other thing I was going to say is it is kind of typical of a lot of writers. I mean, one of the questions that I often ask is this your first novel? I know it's your first published novel, but is it your first novel? And as you say, it's not. You've written multiple novels before, and it's kind of it's part of the process, isn't it?
It is, for sure. I mean, I was starting from a fairly low base, to be honest. I kind of needed to teach myself not only how to write, but how to read as well, in the sense of reading more critically and more widely. I had quite a lot of catching up to do, because I wasn't one of these authors who's kind of been immersed in books, 24/7 my entire life. I always enjoyed fiction and certainly film as well. I think the two very much go hand in hand. But in terms of actually trying to do this, do it as a pursuit, I was, like I say, starting pretty much from scratch. So I think the idea of just kind of sitting down and turning out a novel that's good enough for publication is just a myth. I mean, it'll be 10 years, I think, from when I first started trying to write properly to now, to the book coming out. So, and I think that's fairly typical, to be honest.
It is, yeah. As you say, you kind of have to do your time almost. So did you find with the other novels that you wrote, were they in completely different genre, or did you try a few different genre, or how did that go?
Yeah, they were definitely different. They were their own things. Like I say, I don't really pay too much attention to genre for right or wrong. So it was just trying to write the particular stories in the best way I thought possible. I mean, some of them had a kind of more darkly kind of comic element to them. One was certainly more contemporary, with a bit of a kind of ghost story thrown in there as well. So it was a bit. It was playing around. It was kind of learning the craft. Doing a bit of experimentation, and I mean, none of them were right, and none of them were good enough. But I wouldn't change it for the world, because I think by going through that process, hopefully you end up where you need to be. So, yeah.
Did it feel different when you started writing? Or when you got a certain way into Only Killers and Thieves, did you sort of feel different? Did you have a feeling, not necessarily that it was necessarily going to get published and that it was, going to be successful or whatever, but did it feel different when you were writing it? Did you think, hang on, I think I might be onto something here?
Yeah, I think it did, but only not in the sense of how it would be received, kind of when or if I eventually sent it out.
More like how you felt about when you were writing it.
Yeah, I think for me it felt like a big step up, and it felt like a real challenge, as if I don't want to be kind of too philosophical about it, I suppose, but it felt as though I was kind of finally striving for something that was of the right kind of standard, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it was something that needed taking very seriously, and needed an awful lot of work, and needed me to be better than I had been up until now. And I think that that gives you a kind of, or certainly for me, it gave me a kind of good feeling like, well, this is scary, but if I'm able to pull this off, then I can have something I'll be proud of here. And then, like I say, the kind of the outside world is just who knows,
you can't predict that.
No, you can't.
You can't. You can just do your best work, which you have. It's excellent. So in one of the things that I read in the research for this was, so you got I think you've got a master's in creative writing from the University of East Anglia. So how did you find doing that, and what made you go, what motivated you to do that? Was it just a case of, you talked earlier about this idea of wanting to sort of catch up and get more into the literary frame of mind? Was it literally that, or what kind of motivated you to take kind of the formal education route with it?
Yeah, there were two main reasons, I suppose. One was my wife and I were in Australia. We had a 2-year-old daughter. We were thinking of maybe moving back to the UK. We didn't really know. We were kind of very torn. We loved our life in Melbourne, but there were family reasons starting to pull us back this way. And so I was left thinking, well, if we do move back, what am I going to do? Am I going to try and, I don't know, go back into law? Am I going to keep trying to pursue writing? And I'd never really thought about doing a creative writing course, not seriously anyway, but that kind of prompted me to start looking. And then there was also the feeling that I think I'd maybe just finished a novel or something, and it had been rejected, and kind of that feeling of, have I taken myself as far as I can go? Do I need a bit of something extra without really knowing what that something extra was? And so I thought, well, if I just apply to one, then I'll apply to the MA at UEA, which certainly at the time anyway had the kind of top reputation. And lo and behold, I got in. So it was then a kind of, right, well, what do I do with this? So having made the kind of the personal decision as a family to move back, I thought, well, let's do it. Let's do the course. And in terms of the kind of impact it had, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very valuable. There's an awful lot of preconceptions, I think, these days. It seems like a week doesn't go by without there being an article somewhere about the value of creative writing courses. And I think it's kind of a personal thing for each writer themselves. And for me, what it did was, I think on a kind of technical basis, it made me think about my writing slightly differently than I had done before, just on a very technical level. And secondly, it puts you into an environment where creativity is championed and generally thrives. And you're surrounded by either successful writers or aspiring writers. There are visiting talks from well-known authors and all this kind of thing, and you almost can't help but be inspired or feel inspired. And it was a fantastic year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But the question of kind of, would I have still written this book if I hadn't been on the course? It's you really don't know. I think it's a very personal thing for each.
Of course, yeah.
Each
and like
writer,
as you say, you'd been writing before that anyway. But I guess that just gave you an excuse, if anything else, just to immerse yourself in that world and pick up extra skills. So as somebody that hasn't done anything like that, the formal education side of writing, for people that haven't done that, give us an idea of some of the things that you do as part of the course. What's, obviously some of it's critical reading and writing and things like that, but what sort of, you mentioned some of the technical skills and the practical side of things. What does that look like?
I mean, the essence of the course at UEA is built around workshops, which it's not really teaching. It's basically every week you do a 3-hour workshop where kind of 3 or 4, I think it's 3, it's 1 hour per person. 3 students get their work discussed. And that kind of rotates each week so that everyone gets a fair crack. And what you basically do is you sit there and 10 what starts off as strangers and then end up as friends, kind of pull your work to pieces under the guidance of a tutor. But what that does is it enables you to see your work in a very different way than if it's just you sitting in front of a screen. And you start and kind of, there'll be comments that people make that you don't agree with at all. But there might be just something that resonates or that makes you think differently about that particular piece or that particular extract. And then married to the workshops, you can take different classes in, different elements of writing, whether it's the technical or kind of a particular genre like crime thriller writing or, whatever it is, which again, it's not the kind of, it's not maybe what you think of when you think of teaching. It's a lot more collaborative and kind of you don't sit there being lectured to. Everyone sits in a room and you discuss. But it means that you're in a whole melting pot of ideas about literature and about your particular work, all geared to the craft of writing, not to the critical side of kind of literary academia. It's all geared around actually writing. So, people take from it what they will. There'll be some people who'll do these courses and hate it, I assume. But for me, I really enjoyed it.
I haven't met anybody that's hated it, to be fair. I've spoken to quite a few authors that have done similar things to that, and they've all really, really enjoyed it. And I think, as you say, I think the power of, we've talked a lot on the show before about critique in general, whether that just be a critique group or whatever with other writers, there's just something about, exposing your work to other writers for, the critical input. And I mean, apart from anything else, just reading your work out loud is a completely different experience. As you say, there's a whole lot of difference to just sitting writing in front of a screen and then reading it out. So presumably, because by the time you did the masters, you'd already been through a few cycles of writing a novel, and as you say, nearly getting there, and the usual thing, the rejection that most people have to deal with. So presumably, when you sat down to read out in those workshops and things, it was no big deal.
Well, I don't know about that. Because, when you get a rejection, it's a letter in the post. If you're sitting across the table from someone, it feels pretty personal. But no, I mean, it definitely takes some courage to kind of open yourself up like that. But I think that's a really good skill in itself. I think as a writer, especially if you're hoping to be published, and you'll end up going through an editing process, potentially many times on the same novel, you have to be able to take constructive criticism, and you have to take it in the right way. And so I think kind of exposing yourself like that to other writers and doing the same for them, it forces you to maybe think more critically and more carefully about your own work. You say about receiving criticism, it's also pretty hard to give criticism when you're sitting, like I say, around a table with your peers. But if you can develop that skill, it's a fantastic tool, because it means you're a lot more, well, hopefully a lot more perceptive as to your own shortcomings once you've left the workshop environment.
Right, let's take a quick break there for this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week it's Victoria Goldman bringing us her review of Turn a Blind Eye by Vicky Newham.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I'll start off with the blurb. A dead girl. A wall of silence. D.I. Mayaraman is running out of time. A headmistress is found, strangled in her East London school. Her death, the result of a brutal and ritualistic act of violence. Found at the scene is a single piece of card, written upon which is an ancient Buddhist precept: I shall abstain from taking the ungiven. At first, D.I. Mayaraman can't help but hope this is a tragic but isolated murder. Then, the second body is found. Faced with a community steeped in secrets and prejudice, Maya must untangle the cryptic messages left at the crime scenes to solve the deadly riddle behind the murders before the killer takes another victim. So what do I have to say about Turn a Blind Eye? This is a well-paced, well-researched, well-written and well-plotted police procedural. The plot focuses on a multicultural school in Tower Hamlets. D.I. Maya Rahman is struggling to investigate, as many of the locals seem reluctant to help, and it's clear that there's tension bubbling under the surface, like a volcano ready to erupt. She's also grieving over the death of her brother, having recently returned from his burial in Bangladesh, and struggling with her own sense of identity. Author Vicky Newham has constructed a multi-layered and complex plot, with realistic characters and believable dialogue. She feeds tidbits of information throughout the book, providing enough intrigue to keep her plot moving along steadily, but not so fast that you can't take it all in. There are twists, turns and surprises right until the end. Turn a Blind Eye brings the East End of London to life, with a great sense of place and an emphasis on location. The author spent time living and working there for many years and returned to research her novel. This shines through in her vivid descriptions and depictions of East End culture. Both of her main characters, Rahman and her new partner, D.S. Dan Maguire, who has recently arrived from Australia, aren't that familiar with the modern East End, even though Maya grew up there. So you get to experience it through their eyes, rather than through the eyes of someone who knows it well. This is very much a book about identity, outsiders, and a sense of belonging, or fitting in. The book highlights local community spirit, cultural diversity, and work ethic, and also isn't afraid to touch on racial tension, cultural clashes, and educational issues. It feels fresh and authentic, and in keeping with modern times, a book about prejudice, racism and sexism. I got to know D.I. Rahman and her team well, but the book left me with enough mystery to want to know more. This is a fantastic debut and a very promising start to what will hopefully be a great series. Turn a Blind Eye is published by HQ.
Book Bloggers Corner.
Thanks again to Victoria, and she blogs at Off the Shelf Books, which features reviews and interviews with authors, publishers, editors and agents, and you can also find her on Twitter at Victoria Goldmar too. Right, let's get back to my chat with Paul Howarth, where I asked Paul about dealing with rejection. I know it sounds like an obvious question. It's like one of those questions that they ask football managers after a football game. How did you feel about losing? Well, I felt pretty bad. But I mean, how did you cope with the rejection? Because obviously you carried on writing. Or was there a point, any point in the process where you thought, you know what, I might just not bother with this. It's, you know, I'm spending a lot of time doing it and I'm not getting where I want to be. Or was it just a case you just loved doing it anyway?
I mean, I'm quite stubborn, and I've got a fair bit of kind of perseverance and persistence in me. So it would have taken a fair bit, I think, to stop me carrying on. But I think maybe, I mean, well, let's answer the two parts of the question in chronological order. So when the rejections came, I think at first it was what I expected. I kind of knew, as I said earlier, that I still had a lot of learning to do. Yeah. So, and I made the typical rookie mistake of, you know, sending out a first draft and it wasn't ready, and, you know, everyone rejected it, and it was kind of like, oh well, okay. And then I suppose it you know, it does start to test you. The further you go, and maybe the closer you get, the harder it gets as well. When people are saying, I really like it, but you kind of think, well, what more do I need to do almost? But I always felt, I certainly always told myself that the fault lay with me and with the book, and not necessarily with people I was sending it to. And I always believed that if I could write the book that I felt I was capable of, then at least I could hold my hands up and say, well, I've kind of given it my all. And I think that's where I got to with maybe this one. You kind of asked if there was a point at which I thought, oh, let's just give it up. Maybe I mean, it's easy to say this in hindsight, but maybe if this one had gone the way of the others, that might have been a turning point for me.
Might have been a little bit more difficult to shake off.
It could have been, yeah, it could have been. But thankfully, I will never know.
So, what was different with the book that's out now? How did that go? Did you send that out to agents first, or did you approach publishers? What was the process there?
Yeah, so I sent it to agents. I'd been through the process a few times, as we've just discussed, so I kind of knew how it worked, which I didn't do when I very first started writing it. It was like kind of trying to figure out how could I get into space or something like that. I was so kind of so outside the world of publishing 10 years ago. But thankfully, by the time I came to send this out, and also one benefit, I suppose, of doing the UEA course is that you kind of get that
from a networking point of view as well.
Yeah, I mean, and none of that is going to get your book signed, but what it does is it gives you or it gave me anyway, a better idea of maybe who I might send it to, or which agencies at the very least were kind of right for me, maybe. And then it was just a case of kind of researching for quite a long time as best I could on the internet which individual agents would be worth sending to, and as you say, some of those I'd heard from or seen, or gone to a talk with or something via the course at UEA. So I sent out to about I think it was 9 in the first round, with an idea that I would I'd then have a second round and potentially third, fourth, whatever it was. But fairly quickly started to get interest, so didn't need to go any further than that. So and having sent novels out and either never having received a response or waited 6 months or something to get a rejection, that was really nice, to be able to get that kind of interest fairly quickly. So yeah.
Oh, it must have been an amazing feeling. So what was it like when you basically decided that, who is it that you signed with in the end? Who's your agent?
Lucy Luck at C&W.
And so what did that feel like when you actually you went down into that process and you actually signed with Lucy?
Yeah, it felt a massive, first of all, fantastic, obviously, but also felt like a massive relief. It was like, because I had a few agents interested, and they were all lovely and incredibly professional, and would have been very easy to work with, and very capable at fantastic agencies. So it was one of those decisions where you kind of feel like, obviously it's a good thing, but also you don't want to make the wrong choice. So once I'd made my decision, and once I'd spoken to Lucy and confirmed that I was going with her and everything else, I felt really happy, and I felt kind of relieved that I could put the process to bed, if that doesn't sound too ungrateful a way to describe it, because there've been quite a lot of meetings and quite a lot of phone calls and what have you, and like I say, you just want to make sure you get these things right. So but I'm very pleased. And
then you've got somebody else on your side.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly, which is fantastic. It's one of the most important relationships I think that an author will have. So if you can find somebody who is right for you, then I think it's a great opportunity, and hopefully a relationship that'll last a career.
And having been accepted, and obviously now you're being published, has it added to your confidence? Did it make you feel better when you sat down to write the next book?
Probably not, to be honest. Because you're still back to the beginning of something. You're still back to the blank page. I mean, it does give you confidence in the sense that first of all, you know what it takes to write a book. And I think certainly when you start out trying to write something of novel length, just the sheer length of the thing can be quite daunting. To be able to have all those balls juggling in the air for 300, 400 pages, that's quite a task. So the fact that you can write a piece of fiction that is novel length and all the dots join up and everything works, that gives you confidence. But the issues are always the same. I mean, it's always the same as to whether you can get the characterization right, whether the plot's interesting enough, the pacing, the style, the technical kind of nuts and bolts of the thing. I mean, yeah, does it make it easier? I mean, maybe it does. I think I'm probably being a bit unfair.
Well, I guess it may be not necessarily. I think, as you say, I don't think it's going to make the process any easier, because writing a book is hard, as you say, and I haven't spoken to anybody that said, I'm on my 5th book and now it's just easier than it's ever been. Yeah. So have you kind of, obviously over the course of writing several novels, have you kind of got like a process that you kind of fit into now? Have you kind of got a way of working? Do you like to know all your plot beats before you start writing, or do you just go for it? This is the premise, this is the idea, this is the location. Let's just start writing and see where it goes.
Yeah, I'm more the latter, but with a little bit of the former. So I tend to like to know how a book finishes, and that's not a conscious thing. It's not like I sit down and think, okay, how's this going to finish? The idea probably doesn't crystallize in my mind until I have both the beginning and the ending. And I tend to like to know kind of a couple of main plot points along the way. So, roughly the beginning and then kind of a third, 2/3 and the end. If I kind of know where I'm aiming for at those kind of midway junctures, then I'm okay to just kind of sit down and kind
your
of
way.
Go with it. Yeah. So I'm not really a kind of plan it all out beforehand, because I think really for me the book kind of reveals itself in the writing, and I think if I was to try and plot something out beforehand, it would be just utterly terrible and probably like really predictable, and there'd be absolutely nothing of any value in there at all. So but what I do is I rewrite quite a lot as I go, and that's taken me a while, I think, to kind of accept about myself, because you hear a lot of authors say that they just bang out the first draft and they don't care kind of what the quality's like, or if things are inconsistent, or if a character does one thing in the first act and then something completely the opposite in the second act. But I kind of need to know that what I've got behind me, although I know I'll rewrite it eventually, but I need to know that it stands up to where I'm going. So I'm quite slow, I suppose, in that I'll write a scene and then the next day I'll rewrite it a bit, and then I'll maybe do kind of one more day, and then it's like, okay, now I can move on. So yeah, it's a fairly kind of slow and methodical process, just kind of one scene after the next, and kind of see where we go.
I suppose it's how it works for you. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit more about the editing process, a little bit more for the epilogue, a little bonus question. But before we kind of move towards wrapping things up, so can you give us any hints about what the next book might be, which kind of avenues you're going down, or is it too early to say or reveal?
Well, it's always dangerous to do this, of course, because like I
won't
said,
hold you to it.
there have been a few false starts, and I've been like that kind of the whole time I've been writing. There must be goodness knows how many abandoned novels kind of sitting on the hard drive somewhere. At the minute, I'm working on something that's connected to Only Killers and Thieves. So I'm kind of back into that world. So, but there are other ideas kind of knocking on the door that I'm trying to keep at bay. So hopefully this one will stick, and we'll see.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it. So where can people find out more about you online, or follow what you're up to and find out more about the book?
So I'm on Twitter at Paul Howarth _ The original Paul Howarth must have beaten me to it. The book's available. It'll be online in all the usual places, in Waterstones, in independent bookstores, everywhere from 7th of June. And yeah, there's various things online. If you just Google Only Killers and Thieves, it's all there. So you'll find reviews and kind of various details, Goodreads reviews, that kind of thing. So yeah, Only Killers and Thieves, and Paul Howarth _.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes as well. And I can't wait to crack on with the book. As I say, I'm just past the halfway point, and I'm loving it. So I highly recommend it to anybody listening. And but for the time being, Paul, thanks a million. That's great.
That's great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks again to Paul, and I really recommend Only Killers and Thieves, which I recently finished, and I loved it. It's very emotive, and it's a real page-turner. I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. So that wraps things up for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from, and then you can get the show downloaded automatically every week. Also remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments. Please, any tips on the synopsis would be greatly appreciated. And you can tweet me with where you're listening or why you enjoy the show, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up